Hello, this is Adam Carroll with Justice for All, and the show is UN This Week. Earlier this year, the iconic Doomsday Clock was set closer to midnight than at any point since its creation in 1947. In January, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and its board of sponsors, which includes 13 Nobel laureates, moved the Doomsday Clock from 2 minutes to midnight to 100 seconds to midnight. What reason did they give? Worsening nuclear threat, lack of climate action, and rise of cyber-enabled disinformation campaigns. Now, coming up on September 26th, we have the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. That is a tall order, since we are currently still facing an existential threat with these weapons. The UN General Assembly will do a high-level event on October 2nd, but on September 26th, there will be an event organized by Pax Christi, which I think is being shown here now. And for more information, you can check our comments section later on, and we'll give you contact. So with this really serious issue, we have two very expert guests active on disarmament who can explain the current crisis we face and the opportunities for action at the UN and beyond. So Allison Pytlak and Seth Shelden, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Allison Pytlak manages the disarmament program of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, where she contributes to the organization's monitoring and analysis of disarmament processes, as well as its research and other publications, and liaises with UN, government, and civil society colleagues. She has over a decade of experience working in arms control and disarmament, with direct participation in several prominent international advocacy campaigns. So you'll see the organizational banner. The organization, which is also known as WILPF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, was born in 1915. So more than 100 years have passed since its birth. And still the world is haunted by the specter of war. We see patriarchy, militarism, and neoliberalism as three interrelated causes that push us all towards more conflict, according to the website. With national sections in India and Pakistan and many European and African countries as well, the League has focus countries including Cameroon, Ukraine, Bosnia, Nigeria, and many others. Just to also introduce Seth. Seth Shelden is the UN liaison for the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which is known as Icann. And Icann is the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize winning coalition working to prohibit and eliminate nuclear weapons. Seth assists governments in signing, ratifying, and otherwise acceding to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And he represents Icann in promoting the entry into force and universalization of the treaty. Mr. Sheldon has a background in law and also serves on the board of directors for the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy. So welcome to you both. Icann, of course, is based in Geneva and we're going to speak about it in a moment. But I wonder, Alison, if you could say a few words about the history of your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. I think WILP is a very unique and a very special organization with a long and special history to it. So as you've already noted, we were formed more than 100 years ago when a group of more than 1,100 women came together in The Hague to protest the First World War, as well as to discuss how to end the war and ensure a permanent peace. And that meeting ended with the foundation of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And the organizers of that meeting were suffragists who saw the link between their struggle for women's rights as well as with the struggle for peace. And they believed that the full and equal participation of women in decision-making processes related to peace was necessary to achieve a peace that would be sustainable. And while the organization has, evolved in many different ways over the last 105 years, I think that that original analysis and original spirit, which animated those women, is still with those of us working for the organization today.
Thank you, Allison. And Seth, I wonder if you could say something about your organization, which is a huge, broad-based campaign, and I think with maybe over 500 participating organizations. Am I right?
Yeah, I think the number at the moment is 582, but it changes from time to time in 105 countries. And WILP, which Allison just introduced, the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom, is one of them, but also one of the 10 steering group members that is really at the core of Icann, because Icann really consists of its partner organizations. Icann has not been around as long as WILP. It's by any stretch. In fact, we're pretty new. We were conceived in Australia in 2006, launched in Vienna in 2007, and we haven't been around that long, really, and we really do stand on the shoulders of 70 plus years of anti-nuclear weapons activists and that sort of are at, again, the core of the work that we do. What do we do? We were organized to advocate for complete and total elimination of nuclear weapons, and we were motivated to, over the decade or so, to accomplish this by focusing on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. And that is really the story of Icann, leading to the negotiations that brought about the treaty that we now advocate for in our core work.
Seth, I was just wondering also, if you could say something about basically how many countries have nuclear weapons, and how many are there in the stockpiles?
Yeah, so there are basically approximately 14,000 nuclear weapons in the hands of nine states, 9 countries. And those are the original countries that had them, the US, then Russia, France, China, and the UK, and all of which are in the nuclear non-proliferation treaty regime. But then we also have a few others now, as most of your viewers probably know: India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel.
Yeah, and I guess these later editions aren't signatories to some of the treaties. So the earlier treaties, Allison, I was wondering if you could say something about what the first treaties were, or first agreements were, relating to non-proliferation.
Yep. So maybe one of the first ones to talk about is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It entered into force in 1970. So this year actually is the treaty's 50th anniversary. And the states parties who have signed it, they were meant to have met for what's called a review conference, which happens every so many years. And that's an opportunity for those countries to sort of take stock of what's working well in treaty implementation and what is not working well. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that meeting did not happen as scheduled earlier in May. And we're hopeful that it will take place instead in January 2021. Now, I think that the name says non-proliferation, but it's actually a treaty that is about disarmament. It is also about the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And those two factors, combined with the agreement to not proliferate further nuclear weapons, are sort of thought of as the three pillars of that treaty. So the countries who are party to it that have nuclear weapons agree to get rid of their nuclear arsenals. Those countries that do not have any agree to never acquire them. And then all states have the right, I guess, to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. But what's of course frustrating is that those countries who had nuclear weapons when they signed up have not followed through on that commitment, and some other countries have, in the interim, acquired them. But for sure, the vast majority of states have abided by the non-proliferation commitments contained in the treaty. And then following that and getting more, I guess, into the other years, the later years of the Cold War, you started to see more bilateral agreements between major nuclear powers to reduce or to limit their stockpiles. And that has had some success. The numbers are not nearly as high as they once were, but there are still a lot of nuclear weapons out there. And I think that really that sense of frustration between countries, the ones who have and the ones who have not, helped to generate a lot of the impetus that has led us to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, that Seth was talking about, and the work of Icann. And I think what's also really changed over the years is that, for many decades, talking about nuclear disarmament was talking a lot in very kind of sterile terms, like how many missiles do we have left? There was no sense of the catastrophic humanitarian impacts that nuclear weapons would create in the world for people and for our planet. And so the momentum that led up to the agreement of the TPNW really brought back that very centrally into multilateral discussions about nuclear disarmament. And it's been a real game changer in the discourse and the way we think and talk about this.
Seth, I wondered if you would like to add in about more recent work promoting particular treaties.
Well, I mean, I'd like to add in, maybe I could just build on what Allison was introducing around the NPT, because the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as she said, is not just about non-proliferation, it also has the components of disarmament and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And a lot of what brought about the momentum for the ban treaty, as it's sometimes called, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is the treaty that will soon enter into force that Icann works on again, was this growing sentiment, as Allison was saying, between the haves and the have-nots, that many of the nuclear armed states were not abiding by their obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this is the way these treaties connect, because Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty obligates their states' parties to work towards general and disarmament. And it was this failure to implement this, at least in the eyes of the majority of states' parties, that brought about this work towards building a treaty that was meant to work with the NPT, with the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, but also be the building block towards actual and finally building elimination of nuclear weapons.
Well, the overall context, of course, is conflict, geopolitics, and that includes the trade of conventional weaponry, even chemical and biological weapons. I understand there are agencies at the UN that are working on these issues. I don't know if your organizations also do, but I see that with some of these treaties, like the UN Arms Trade Treaty, last year President Trump ended the ratification process. I don't know what his his justification was in his mind. So are we facing a moment of state hostility towards multilateral agreements on these issues? Either of you could answer. Yeah.
I mean, yes, I think that over the last few years, there has been a stepping back from some very significant arms control and disarmament treaties. I wouldn't say that the majority of countries around the world are doing this. A lot of it has been the United States government stepping back from things, whether it is in relation to nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament, or in relation to the trade in conventional weapons, the Arms Trade Treaty, which you just referenced. It definitely, like, there is, I think, a lot more hostility and antagonism. I have seen it in the meetings that I go to at the United Nations, a lot more kind of tit for tatting and back and forth between countries like the United States and Russia, or with China and with Iran. So there is, I think, a sense of heightened tension, maybe more than many of us have been used to for a long time. But I mean, there's also lots of other really positive stuff happening in the world as well, and a lot of really good collaboration, I think, on other issues. So even though, some very powerful countries are maybe stepping back from agreements, and that is something that needs to be addressed and meaningfully addressed, I don't think it's the mood of the whole global community.
I think we've got the United States Office for Disarmament Affairs. There are probably several special rapporteur experts working on this field. I think it is a major priority at the United Nations in its mandate to ensure peace and security. And yet we have nationalism sort of on the increase, perhaps. Many of our viewers may be aware of the sort of India-Pakistan rivalry, and both are now nuclear powers. Are there regional efforts to rein in that kind of arms race, a local arms race, which is so concerning? And are there efforts to create nuclear-free zones? I think I've heard something about that. Seth?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of local work among the hot zones or the conflict regions to bring about disarmament, and probably in terms of nuclear weapon free zones, there has been some progress most recently with a Middle East zone, weapon of mass destruction free zone. There was a conference that was held last November that was long in coming and has many hope will start, is the beginning of a process that will lead to some kind of treaty there as well. There are already existing a number of nuclear weapon free zones that make most any activity relating to nuclear weapons illegal in most regions of the world. We have them, in Africa with the Treaty of Pelindaba. We have them in the Pacific with the Treaty of Rarotonga. We have an Asian nuclear weapon free zone. We have a South American, Latin American Treaty of Tlatelolco nuclear weapon free zone. So through this patchwork, we have a large part of the world that themselves commits not to having or using or attempting to acquire nuclear weapons. But we know more and more increasingly, especially with the sophistication of and power of the weapons in arsenals, that this will not keep the world safe, and that until we have a global treaty that actually makes nuclear weapons comprehensively and categorically illegal for everyone. And so that's really what the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons aims to bring about. And if I can just also add that, we spoke about the deteriorating bilateral relationships among so many nuclear weapon powers or nuclear armed countries, and that is rightly so of great concern. And this is a world in 2020 when we see a lot of states stepping back from multilateralism. But as Allison says, there are still sparks of hope. And I think that for many people, this ban treaty, which will soon enter into force, is a source of great hope. And it is one of the only treaties that is actually it's making real strides towards getting new states parties or new ratifications, and is doing so in an environment where other, multilateralism is under threat, and that there are other practical challenges, including the pandemic. And so it is rightly so, I think, offering a good way forward as far as many people in many countries are concerned.
Just to follow up, how many states parties are there to that one?
Right. So it has not yet it will enter into force when we have 50 states parties. And right now we have 44 states parties as of today.
Okay,
and
good.
A further 84 countries that have already signed it, and another 55 or 60 or so that have indicated their support. So the vast majority of the world, about 2/3 of the world, is supportive of the treaty.
Now, I wanted to look at the gender dimension of this, because perhaps viewers wouldn't automatically, well, I shouldn't say, but might not automatically see that. And so I was wondering, Alison, if you could speak a bit about the gender dimension. Is it about perspective? Is it about the percentage of UN staff working on this issue? What is the gender dimension?
Well, yeah, it's all of those things actually. When I talk about this topic, it's usually helpful to sort of break it down into a few pieces. So one of those pieces is thinking about how weapons or the trade of weapons or armed violence affect people differently on the basis of their gender. And sometimes that is, it's a very overt thing. Like a lot of people often think about gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, man against woman, use of a gun. I think that's sort of like maybe the go-to easier example, but there's lots of other less immediately visible ways in which armed conflict and armed violence affect people differently on the basis of their gender. And that has to do with the roles that we play in our many societies. It could be something as simple as women in some communities being more at risk of stepping on a landmine because of what they have to do in the course of their day to collect food or to collect water or to see their children to and from school. So that gives them a different vulnerability maybe than the men in their household would have. So part of this conversation is about thinking of those gendered impacts. Another part of it is also thinking about some of our cultural attitudes around masculinity and femininity. What is it to be a man? Is it to be strong? Is it to be a fighter? Is it to carry a gun or to use a weapon? And I think how we think about these things, they're very sensitive and they can be very personal topics. But it's that sort of normative discussion that really links into how we view weapons and the prestige that we often, or many people often, associate with the possession or use of weapons, as if it's somewhat glamorized. Another aspect of it, of course, is, how there are gendered impacts of weapons that are maybe indirect, and not because a weapon is actively being used against somebody on the basis of their gender. But a good example here is thinking about radiation. We know from the long history of nuclear weapons testing, particularly in the Pacific, but also in parts of the United States, that women's bodies react differently to nuclear radiation than do male bodies, and that this has a spin-off effect on maternal health that we wouldn't really think about unless we start doing a gender analysis of these problems. And then another piece is also about participation and who's at the table. Is it, a male-dominated table? Is it about having more diversity when we're talking about security? How are we defining what it is to be safe, and from whose perspective? So at the moment, a lot of the sort of international policy dialogues and processes, when they're talking about gender or gender perspective, they're talking about things like impacts of weapons or impacts of armed violence or conflict. And they're also talking about participation and diversifying or achieving better equality in working in disarmament and security.
That's interesting. And I hope it isn't just a matter of a lot of men in a room speaking about women's rights, and that the men are speaking with the women. And vice versa. So it's civil society, sometimes notes with alarm that space is shrinking at the UN, and one hears that often. And it seems that civil society, nonprofits, academia, religious groups and so forth need to fight to maintain a role. And yet you all have been extremely active and I think successful in partnering with states, with governments, with agencies at the UN. So I was wondering what both of you, what your perspective is on good practices, best practices to keep that going. Maybe Seth, maybe if you could jump in first.
Well, I could speak about Icann's experience with this. I think Allison probably can speak a little more broadly too about NGO participation in general and partnerships. But I think, as you say, we have had a lot of success working with states, including our core group of state supporters that have led the negotiation process among both at the conference to bring about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but also the humanitarian consequences conferences throughout, starting in 2013, that led to the declaration that led to the conference to negotiate the treaty. And this has been a very close partnership and a very successful one. Of course, we again stand on the shoulders of many organizations, including many of our partner organizations that have built those connections with a lot of the diplomats and officials at these states that have given us the opportunity to bring this about. But I think we have still a long way to go. Our treaty is like I say, it's yet to enter into force, and we have then to set the next stage once we have the first meeting of the states parties to work with them as civil society at that next level. But so far, I think we have had a lot of success with it.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I would agree that often disarmament and security, these are kind of harder issues, I guess, sometimes to work closely with governments on. But there have been so many good examples of partnerships between civil society groups in this area, working cooperatively with governments to bring about mutually desired change. I think a lot of this goes back to the international campaign to ban landmines, one of the first really big disarmament NGO coalitions. And from there, several others have emerged over the last 20, 25 years who have kind of built on that model, but adapted it to the specific weapons issue that they're working on or the forum that they need to engage in. And all of these different weapons issues, they all have kind of separate spaces, separate meeting forums and cycles where they get talked about and addressed. And some are quite good for civil society participation. We can be in the room, we can be helping states by giving expertise or information as needed. My organization in particular, we do a lot of monitoring and reporting on what's being said in the room. But there are some others where we have less access. And what's been something of a troubling trend right now since the pandemic started is that a lot of these multilateral processes, they're becoming more closed. And I think many of us, Seth, I don't know if you agree, feel that the space might be shrinking a little bit right now. And maybe just to give some examples, like some conferences, they've moved to formats where there is no actual meeting, either virtual or in person, and they're just taking inputs in writing. And they're taking sort of decisions by what's called a silence procedure, which sort of rules out the opportunity for debate or deliberation or discussion. And others have just sort of become closed to us as well and are happening more and more behind closed doors. So we really hope that this doesn't become sort of a precedent-setting moment and that it is really just bred out of the extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I hope so. Oh, we're at the half-hour point, so we're going to pause for just a moment for our identification. So this is Adam Carroll with Justice for All. This is UN This Week.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah, let's explore.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is very smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
And we're back, and this is Adam Carroll with UN This Week with my two guests, Allison Pytlak of Women's Wilt and Seth Shelden from Icann. And we're talking about disarmament. And so maybe now is a moment just to express my amazement and awe and gratitude that Icann received the Nobel Prize in 2017.
Yep.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I know that you all represent a working relationship among hundreds of groups. And I was wondering if you could say anything about how that recognition might have, I hope, helped your organization move forward.
Yeah, I can certainly start by saying that it was seen, rightly so, as an affirmation of the 70 plus years of work, first of so many survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki the doctors who were on the scene in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the survivors of testing, and those who have suffered losses of their families, and also losses of their lands, long forgotten lands that have been irradiated through nuclear weapons testing, always done, as Allison notes, in a very colonialist kind of like. In general, nuclear armed states did not test in their capital cities. They tested on, in the South Pacific or in Northern Africa, or Russia testing in Kazakhstan, And so it's all of those people that have fought so long and hard for this. People who have worked on nuclear weapons issues have been recognized by the Nobel Committee in the past, but Icann was awarded this prize for specifically first bringing attention to the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons in a renewed fashion, and also for its contributions to bringing about the first categorical ban on nuclear weapons, which of course is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And as a result, I think it both affirmed, as I said, the work that had been done, but also legitimized the work that we're continuing to do. I mean, I think that it does, there's no question that it has helped people to pay attention to us. It is not just, a group of, it's not as easily dismissed group of peace lovers who are, just holding signs. I mean, it both recognizes the doors that we'd already opened in governments and helps us to open more doors in governments. And I think in that sense has been an invaluable tool. Of course, we also recognize that as a call to action. I mean, this is in no way, and in fact, I think the Nobel Committee always thinks about the Nobel Prize this way. It is forward-looking. It is not rewarding you for what you have done, but it rather is giving you something in the hopes that you can do something with it. And over time, it probably is less useful in that way. Like in 20 years, I don't know that it's going to be, it's have the same impact as if to say, we won it last year. And so it is very much for us, I think, a sense, it gives us a sense of urgency. We need to use this now, and we need to, ride on the coattails of this success to go over the line with our treaty and with bringing about a world free from nuclear weapons.
Yeah, good. Alison, I was wondering, I mean, we all live in this mediated environment. And so, we're on Zoom now, but, Zoom is having some impact on your ability to get access to these various meetings. And so we're trying to navigate this emerging world. And then yet there's this cyber aspect of warfare now. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to this, because I think you've been active on this. How is this kind of enlarging the current threat?
No, that's a great question. I think we've all been dealing with so many changed realities over the last 5 or 6 months that it's hard to keep on top of them all. So what many people might not know is that cyber crime has increased, I think by some estimates, 600% since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there have been a lot of, and that's sort of like interpersonal cybercrime, random cyber criminals and hackers trying to get people's personal banking information for their own financial gain. But on a government-to-government level, there's also been an increase in, I don't like to say the word attack because I feel like it contributes to the idea that cyberspace is militarized. So we'll say malicious operations and incidents, but there's been a massive problem with disinformation, with different groups either setting up false websites that are supposed to be health authorities and pretending to give out information about how to act during the pandemic. And a lot of this has been false. There have also been attacks made on medical facilities that has compromised their ability to operate online as well as offline, and potentially compromised the privacy of some of their data. I think that as our lives become more digitalized, and everything like from ordering food on Uber Eats or something to even, shopping, of course, our vulnerability to this only increases as well. And what sort of has been happening at the multilateral level on this is that for the last several years, through different forums and different frameworks, national governments have been meeting and trying to sort of agree on norms to guide their behavior in cyberspace. And there have been different outcomes on this, some as a product of talks at the UN, others as a product of talks elsewhere, sometimes in cooperation with big technology firms and service providers. But one of the sort of overriding principles or norms that all these forums tend to agree on is the importance of critical infrastructure and protecting critical infrastructure from attack. And so that also, I think, speaks a little bit about to how weapons themselves are changing. There is another body, yet another forum at the UN that's talking about autonomy in weapons, autonomous weapons or killer robots, which is also a campaign that WILP is part of to stop killer robots. And that's quite scary because an autonomous weapon would be a weapon that could select and engage a target without any human control or intervention. It would have the ability to take these life and death decisions on its own. And then, of course, there are a whole series of other potential vulnerabilities in nuclear weapon systems. Are they open to an intrusion or to manipulation? So it's quite scary. It's kind of like a whole other set of nightmares to think about, but it's important that we do think about it. It may be less tangible than like looking at a bomb or a gun or a landmine, but certainly as our lives become more digitalized, our vulnerability grows, and we can't let the technology run away from us like this.
Yes, thank you. I hope we'll see more treaties regulating the use of these technologies, including, the cyber war games that are going on now between the nations and interfering with elections and so forth. And so that's certainly something that seems very suited to the United Nations, those kinds of treaties and agreements. So lots to do and many emerging threats. I was wondering, as we wrap up this conversation, if you might offer some suggestions for action and also mention perhaps some things that you are planning. Are there conferences coming up? Are there opportunities for viewers to engage with the website or take action? So maybe I'll ask Seth first.
Well, gosh, I am glad you've asked so much. I mean, you started this by talking about the time that we're in, this very scary time where the Doomsday Clock, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists experts have told the world that we are closer to nuclear Armageddon than we have ever been. And other experts, UNIDIR, the UN Institute on Disarmament Research, agrees with this. There is, it is crazy to think about how peaked everyone's interest in nuclear weapons used to be in the 70s and the 80s. And yet to think that we're actually at a more dangerous time now, which is the case. And there's so much happening this year in particular. I mean, Alison talked about the 50th anniversary of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's also the 75th anniversary of the UN. It's also the 75th year since we dropped nuclear weapons, since the US dropped nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we just commemorated the anniversary on August 6th and August 9th last month. And, it's about to be 75 years since the UN adopted the first resolution of the UN, which was to bring about a means to control atomic energy for, not to use it for weapons of mass destruction. So, and here we are 75 years later with this tool that we finally, built, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And there are some people who are interested in it and want to become active around it. There's so much they can do. I mean, I would start with reading the treaty. It's a beautiful document that speaks about, many of the things we've been talking about, from the gendered impacts of nuclear weapons to the, to the way it's been used in colonial and racist fashions, and it has components of it that seek to remedy that. There's victim assistance provisions and environmental remediation provisions that obligate states parties to assist those who have been affected by use and testing. Now, We have, of course, campaigns around the world, so it depends what country you're in that people are watching from. There are those states that have already signed and ratified, and for them, many people in those countries have helped activate to bring about that to happen. And in those states that have yet to sign and ratify, we need them to keep working. We have parliamentary pledges where we ask people in nuclear armed states, but also in other states that have yet to join the treaty to commit to, in their parliaments, to as legislators, to signing and ratifying and getting their government to move forward. We have this initiative that we call the Icann Cities Appeal, where we link together cities all around the world, in this case in nuclear armed states and umbrella states, and where they say that, despite the position of their government, that they support and call on their country to sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We have a project such as disinvestment or divestment projects, where the Don't Bank on the Bomb project that works with banks, financial institutions, pension funds to help people find a way to divest those entities from nuclear weapon production, manufacturing, and maintenance. And individuals can participate in that too. There are many ways that they can, just by even calling up their bank and telling them that they don't want them to invest in nuclear weapons is a wonderful start. So many things that our campaigners around the world have been working on initiatives like this to support the treaty and to bring about disarmament. Allison, am I leaving any of them out before?
Well, I would wholeheartedly endorse all of the various awesome initiatives that Seth outlined as part of Icann. Maybe just to add, if you really are into what happens at the United Nations and you want to kind of follow along some of these images or these issues, I'm going to make a shameless plug for our website, reachingcriticalwill.org. Reaching Critical Will is the name of WILP's disarmament program. It's not a separate organization, it's a program. And my colleagues and I, we're following these processes. We're writing about them. We're analyzing what's being said in the room. We're putting up statements that governments are delivering. In October, the General Assembly will actually open in a little over a week. It's a new session. It's the 75th session, marking, as Seth said, 75 years since the United Nations was started. So there'll be a whole lot of high-level activity happening in the week of the 21st, which is the International Day of Peace. So if you want to get on Twitter and look at UN at 75, there'll be a bunch of stuff happening there. And then coming out of that, there'll be several weeks of discussion in the General Assembly about disarmament issues and arms control in particular. And we'll be there and we'll be writing about, well, we won't be physically there, but we'll be following along and we'll be writing it and doing some analysis as well. I feel like I had one other thing I wanted to add in on what you can do, but now it's slipping my mind.
I feel like I did too. I would say you could also, if you wanted to follow Allison's work also just on the Twitter for Reaching Critical Will, they always post about the statements as they're happening. So that's a tool that civil society and diplomats use to follow along their own proceedings. They'll follow Reaching Critical Will to learn about what's happening.
And I guess I just maybe would also say that I feel like there's so many big problems facing us right now, right? Like between the health pandemic and the climate crisis and lots of other civil unrest and change. But I don't think these things are unrelated. I think they come from common causes, common senses of injustice and inequality. And sometimes, disarmament, it can seem like a really far away problem or something that maybe doesn't impact us in our immediate and day-to-day lives. But these really are interconnected issues and topics. And I think it's important to approach it in that kind of holistic way.
Well, from the 1950s, ban the bomb movement to the current, movement building that you all are speaking of, there's a lot to embrace and a lot to learn. And I hope that the viewers will follow up. And, our NGO works on addressing genocide of minorities such as the Rohingya and the Uyghur and others. But the worst mass atrocity, the worst genocide would be nuclear war, and what would be left. And so prevention is key. And I really appreciate all your efforts to prevent such a disaster. And I hope that everyone listening will follow up and visit your websites. So thank you very much for being on the show. Thank you to the viewers, and we'll see you next time.